Welcome to this episode of Updates with Ricky. Today I've got with me Mr. Osita Chidoka, the former Minister for Aviation in Nigeria. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Right, okay. So I've done a bit of research on yourself, and I've got quite a bit of questions for you, and I'm sure Nigerians at large are actually curious as to your role in the current administration, well, I would say in the party you belong to now, and then your journey so far. Do you want to tell me a bit about yourself? How did you get to where you are now?
Well, it's been a long journey, but the summary is that after my graduate studies in the United States, I worked briefly for ExxonMobil in Nigeria, and then from there I was appointed co-marshal of the Federal Road Safety Commission with my background in transportation from school. I stayed for 7 years at the Federal Road Safety, transforming it to one of the notable lead agencies in traffic management in Africa, according to the World Bank, and working hard to reduce the deaths on Nigerian highways. So while I was doing that, in the 7th year I was appointed the Minister of Aviation, and I spent less than 1 year at the Ministry of Aviation before we lost the 2015 election. So basically I've been in the transport industry, aviation, roads, and then some private sector experience. And
you did hold some special advisor position as well, right? Before.
Okay, that was prior to my, so I was shortening it. But before then I had worked with different ministries, different ministers as assistants. So I had assisted the Minister of Transportation at some point, the Minister of Works, State for Works and Housing. I'd also served the country in various special committees, like the Pope's visit to Nigeria, the handover to, in 1999, the committee that saw through the ceremony for the handover. I was Assistant Secretary of that committee. So basically I've been around government for a while.
Okay. But having worked in the private sector, you said you worked with ExxonMobil. Why then did you decide to go into politics?
Well, I think I have a natural attraction to public service. Right from my secondary school days, I was deputy senior prefect, I was deputy head boy in school, I was an active student unionist in the university. So I thought politics was going to likely be a vocation for me, and here we are.
Brilliant. Okay, so your role while you were in charge and things you were able to achieve while you were in charge of the Federal Road Safety as an institution, basically, commission then, that's the word I was looking for, earned you a couple of awards. How did you turn that institution around? Basically,
because of my time serving ministers in government and working closely with top government officials, I realized there were a few issues that Africa generally and Nigeria in particular needs to do. So when I came to the Federal Road Safety Commission, I set 3 goals for myself. First, to build a world-class institution, to judge ourselves to the best in the world, not to do it with Nigerian standards. Second of all was to halve the deaths on Nigerian roads and to achieve the goal of the United Nations by 2025 to reduce deaths on our highway. So in that institution building mode, in the first basic level was to transform the institution. So when I came in, the institution was basically analog. People from various commands, it was about 11,000 staff spread across the 36 states and some local governments. So what happens is that if you want something from, say, a unit command in Delta State, they need to write to the sector command, who will then forward it to the zone, and then who will forward it to the headquarters. So for about 3 months, you could be trying to get a tire to replace the tire of a vehicle, and that vehicle is, parked in the garage, waiting for this process to go through. So first thing we did was to say we need to rebuild the institution. We need to modernize it. So we went head on into ICT. From no internet connectivity in the commission, from no computers available for staff to use, by the time I left office, we had the largest wide area network in Nigeria. We had 450 VSATs installed in all the offices in FRSC.
Is that still in place now?
Yeah, it's still in place. Still in place, yeah. 450 VSATs, connecting all the driver's license office, all the road safety offices to a central database. So that way, commands could send me an email making a request and just put everybody on copy, the zone, the sector, everybody's on copy, and then we deal. So we reduce paperwork. Then, of course, to make sure that these changes are institutionalized, we went into ISO 9001 certification to make it a quality management system, to create a manual on how we do things at the Federal Road Safety. So till today, if you go to the Federal Road Safety Commission, there are standards for implementing anything you want, because it is documented, it is authenticated by a third party, and then they come in for audits every 3 years to check whether, the roads. At some point, we were using SAP softwares, Oracle, SAP. We have a driver's license database. The one I inherited was a small database containing the names of doing manual upload. When they finish doing driver's license at the centers, they burn it into CDs and then come back and upload it in the server, and you couldn't connect to it. It wasn't online. But by the time I left, we had built a $10 million data center that had real-time biometric data of all license application with facial recognition, biometric verification, and also available for instant verification. So we had also done the number plate system to attach it to driver's license, so we could trace owners of vehicles using their plate numbers. And then also we could manage our internal processes using SAP, human resource, finance, and then also business intelligence. So from that, we were able to see the flashpoints in Nigeria. So I could tell you that on Thursday, for some strange reasons, death is always at its lowest on Tuesdays on Nigerian roads. And Fridays are the worst days on the Nigerian roads.
People party, don't they?
Not even in the evening. It's the daytime travels, not even night travels that you could associate with alcohol. The daytime travels on Friday. Actually, between the hours of 4 and 6 p.m. is usually the bloodiest period on the roads on Fridays. And it's on the major highways.
Why,
yes, so we kept in looking at why this. But what we did immediately was to send our patrol teams to be more aggressive at those times of the day. And then we began to know things like that, Kaduna State has the highest fatalities, contrary to perception that it could be Lagos. Yeah. Then we now realized, that deaths were happening where they were happening and at what time of day. So that made sure that we deployed our resources to those flashpoint areas at those times of the day to, calm down the road, so to speak. So it was a very interesting 7 years for me. Taking an organization that had no emails, everybody had Yahoo and Gmail, to having our own server hosting 20,000 staff, to having everybody going to promotion interview online and writing exams on computer-based testing, to having the whole staff in FRSC being able to log into the portal and conduct basic, activities of government. And also the front-facing end. We had almost 22 applications which people can reach us. You can apply for a driver's license online. You can apply for a number plate online. We can link you up with your insurance, online. There were so many services that we brought to the people to make life easy for everybody. So basically, I was motivated by the need to, reduce the deaths on Nigerian highway. But I thought that wasn't possible without building an institution with the capabilities to deliver that mandate. The challenge we have with the Western world is that they all talk about outcomes from Africa, but without understanding that the underlying institutions don't exist. Yeah. So there's a major problem. You need to build the underlying infrastructure, what I call the invisible infrastructure. Africa is so fascinated with the visible infrastructure, which is very important. So we need roads, we need highways. But why are the roads not being built? Why are the roads not being maintained? It's because we don't have the invisible infrastructure. We don't have the human infrastructure that makes it possible for people to look at the future, project about it, plan for it, and ensure that we have adequate resources to meet our future demands. So somebody needs to sit down in the Ministry of Education, for instance, and figure out population is growing at 3%. We have 10 million students in primary school today. So that means that if 95% goes on to secondary school, we'll have 9.5 million students. Yeah. But it means that in about 10 years' time, we probably will be having 14 million students. How are we going to provide classrooms for the extra 4 million? How are we going to provide teachers for the extra 4 million? Who is, preparing the future? Yeah. So unless and until Nigeria puts the same amount of focus we put on the visible infrastructure to the invisible infrastructure, to that human infrastructure, to that human capacity to monitor, to measure, and to improve, then I think that we're not going to make much progress. So my basic philosophy at FRSC was to measure, monitor, and improve. Because if you don't measure, you can't monitor. And if you don't monitor, you can't improve. So I call it the M²I, the theory of measuring, constant measurement. Where are we today? Where do we want to go? How much, I tell my staff, when people say we want a dashboard, the dashboard means that you want to see the temperature of the car, how much fuel you have, how much engine oil is in the car. So it's still measurement. That's why you have a dashboard. So when you see that your fuel is at half tank and you're still going 200 kilometers, then you know you need to top up your fuel. So those are the kind of thinking that propelled our activities at the Federal Road Safety Commission. So by my 6th year, the World Bank has singled out FRSC as an example of a lead agency that should be emulated, worldwide, and made us a case study, shared it with other countries, both in Latin America and Africa, and then also they emphasized the need for governments all over Africa to adopt this kind of framework. And Sierra Leone did. FRSC Nigeria was their advisor. So our staff were in Sierra Leone to get them up to speed with their road safety plan. We also helped a few other countries in an advisory role to help them.
Brilliant. So how would you compare your role in that capacity in the Federal Road Safety, if I can say it properly, Road Safety Commission? How would you compare your role then with you being as a minister for aviation in the short time that you were there? Were you able to bring in the same impact and the same change you would have loved to, the same way you did in that?
In fact, that was why the president appointed me. He wanted me to do something similar. And I told him, well, he needs some time to do it. But in this short period, we could focus on a few low-hanging fruits. So the first thing I did was to build a passenger portal to track airlines when they take off, when they land, how much fidelity they had to their schedules, so that passengers who want to board an aircraft can go and see the performance of a particular flight. So say the 7 a.m. flight for airline AY. If you go to that portal, you will see that these flights in 97% of the times left on time, or in 45% of the time left on time. So it is for you to make a choice, looking at the flights of all the day to see which one you will fly, and for us to announce which airlines are number one, number two in terms of keeping to their schedules. So that was one of the first things we did, and we built a portal and website for all the airports. Then we wanted to introduce we made sure that air safety was my key goal at the time, to focus on quickly getting the FAA certification, Category 2. We got it back. In the short period, I wanted to introduce the master plan for the Nigerian airports. So the procurement process was a long process. It was on until I left. And I don't think they had continued today. But the whole idea of the master plan was to say, what are the economic issues for the country? What are the projections for the airport? What are the capacities we have today? Are they enough for today? Would they be able to carry the one of tomorrow? And partly because I thought that every time we talk about building, new ones, but are we maximally using the capacities we have today? Could it be that if we change the timing, or if we increase the timing by lightening up our airports and putting on runway lights, maybe the airports can be open till 11 in the night? Yeah. So that way we are doubling capacity already. Instead of closing at 6 p.m., is it possible that maybe we could schedule more flights in the daytime than in the evenings? So these are the kind of issues I wanted to look at, and to have a plan that, what I call to utilize optimally the optimization of our assets. So instead of talking about building, we talk about optimize, refurbish, and optimize. Make sure that you're getting the highest value out of your current assets. But it was an interesting 9 months for me at the aviation. We had all the beginnings of the conversation, getting industry stakeholders together, dialoguing about what we can do, and then beginning to focus on institution building. So I wanted to get all the agencies ISO 9001 certified. I wanted a situation where the internal operation of the agencies meets global standards. And then, of course, make sure that the staff are up to speed in terms of trainings and exchange programs.
Okay. Now, you sound really professional at what you do.
Yeah.
Now, they say politics is a dirty game. You then went from that office, right? You contested for election under UPP. You
Yes.
left the PDP for UPP.
Yes.
The issues that you thought were there or that were there in the PDP before you left, you're now back to the PDP. Do you think those issues are not there anymore?
Yeah, because it was particular to that period. So there was a court case about who was the chairman of PDP and who was not at that time. There was a factional breakup of the PDP and the election was coming in close. There were issues that I thought with the case over and the proper PDP convention carried out, I thought then we had an internal process to resolve issues that I felt will have impeded the elections of Anambra in 2017. And of course that didn't turn out well for PDP or myself either, but I had the opportunity of testing my ideas with the voters and at least introducing those ideas in the public space. And I'm happy that if I look at what most of the presidential candidates are doing today, a lot of it stems from the work I did entirely engaging voters, setting up a call center to call the voters, using ICT, messaging and all that to reach out to voters. I think those are becoming mainstream gradually in the conversations in Nigeria.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you reckon that you not winning the election at the time, would you tie it to the fact that it was because you moved from the PDP to the UPP? Do you think if you were still in the PDP at that time, without whatever issues that might be going on at that time, do you think you would have won?
PDP will have definitely given me a bigger platform and a better platform, but I don't know if I would have won, but it will have definitely given me a more matured platform.
Okay. Now, I want to touch on the issue of the EFCC back then, right? Do you want to tell Nigerians, because obviously there are news and there are fake news. There are news and there are rumors, okay? I want you to use this opportunity to clarify things with whatever the issue back then, because I don't want to make reference to it, but I would like you to clarify things for Nigerians. What was it that EFCC had on you at the time?
So there was the allegation that a certain contract was awarded for 3.9 billion and that the contract was not executed and that the monies were paid and the monies were diverted. And they said I was the one that awarded the contracts and paid the contractor and the monies diverted, ostensibly to my campaign.
Was it during the period of, or was it the election?
The allegation came shortly after the election, but it was ostensibly diverted, from the petition. But when I went to their office, the first clarification was that yes, the contract was awarded just before I left office, but I made no payments. All the payments were made at this government.
Really?
And the payments that have been made so far was 1.something billion, not 3 billion. And the contract was ongoing. Contract had not failed.
Hence the reason why I wanted things to be clarified, basically.
So it was a basic issue of,
Right,
yes.
Okay. Brilliant. Okay, so talking about this current administration now, you're part of the Atiku campaign team, right?
Yes.
Okay, so 2019, let's say before 2019, coming to 2015 to where we are now, how well do you think the current administration is doing?
Well, the current administration,
that's a big sigh.
yeah, because I don't know where the question. of how well they are doing is almost a contradiction in terms. But I will tell you, this
well, I'll let you be the judge of that.
Contradiction in terms. But I will say, I haven't seen the kind of value destruction that this government has done to Nigerian economy like before now. For me, there is an end to politics. So during the run-off to the campaigns, to the allegations and the propaganda to win an election, once the elections are over, I thought that the government, that the president, with his age, with his experience, I had the vague hope that he will, know that in government there are things that just can't be done. So there were issues, there were allegations of corruptions. Please, they should be investigated and dealt with. But there were the more fundamental issues. Oil revenues had declined. The government had a plan. The outgoing government had a plan to to manage it. The same government has set up a sovereign wealth fund where there was $1 billion. I don't see what the problem will have been if the government have said to the outgoing Minister of Finance, before you go back to Washington, can you give us 3 months of your time to help us navigate this, to understand where are we and where do we want to go to? You don't have to work for us. Yeah. Is it possible for them to have asked the debt, you were in charge of the budget, you were in charge of the economy, so can you, stay on for 3 months? This is Nigeria, it doesn't belong to anybody. It's not a party. So the government comes in May and then suddenly says that it will not devalue the naira, despite not having the dollars to fund its obligations. Not only will it not devalue the naira, the government went on to say, Nigerians, a lot of criminality, rogue, money stolen. So there was a tactical demarketing of Nigeria, together with a decision. I don't know how that decision came about. People could not deposit dollars in their account, could not withdraw it as when you needed it.
Yeah, I think I remember that. Yeah,
international capital took flight. And they took flight at the exchange rate prevailing at that time, which the government had refused to devalue. The government didn't even need to say anything. They needed to have just said, we will allow the market forces to determine what we're doing. Second one was that Nigeria in 2013 had made it to the JP Morgan bond index, which made a lot of capital to come to Nigeria because it's a pool. People just send them, because you're in the index, people buy bonds from you.
Exactly. The market was basically attractive
suddenly,
to investors.
The government banned 16 items that says you couldn't use our foreign exchange to buy this. You couldn't use foreign exchange to do this. So the opaque foreign exchange policy of that 3 months, together with non-appointment of a cabinet, non-appointment of a federal executive council, as required by the Constitution, created jitters amongst investors. So what happened? JP Morgan kicked us out of the index. Foreign exchange took flight. Then the Naira dropped from 180, 200 as at the time they took over and went all the way to 550 Naira. At least official rates was about 550. And that was one of the biggest value destruction I've ever seen in any economy. In months, people that had projects that were worth 100 million Naira at that time, at 200 Naira, suddenly had to cough out 250 million thereabouts to fund it. All the capital investments, all the requirements of the economy suddenly went haywire. And of course, what does international capital do, hot money do? It took flight. They leave. And not only did they leave, the local investors who had money couldn't pay it into the bank, couldn't transfer it out of the country, they too held on to their cash. Now, the cabinet came 6, 7 months down the line. The government came about deciding to calm down on the foreign exchange restrictions and all that. By then, the damage has been done. Now, we're talking about $2 billion that was sent by NNPC to the National Security Advisor, and he said it was misappropriated. The value destruction between May 2015 and December 2015, running up to early 2016, if you quantify it, I'm sure it is over $20 billion of what will have left Nigeria and what could have come into Nigeria, and the excess amount, what I call the APC tax that Nigerians paid by paying almost 400 naira, 300 naira above the prevailing regime, the dollar exchange rate when they took over.